Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased that the Fire Safety Bill is finally being debated in this House, nearly 3 years after the Grenfell Tower tragedy. I remember that awful tragedy very well. I carried out the Grenfell community engagement on behalf of the Mayor of London. I would like to use this opportunity to pay tribute to the brave emergency service that attended that fire. I must also pay tribute to the amazing communities that offered help to the people affected on that tragic night and afterwards in beginning to rebuild their lives. I ask that we hold the 72 victims in our thoughts and remember the human cost involved when the right measures aren't taken to protect people. Madam Deputy Speaker, people in tower blocks have lived in fear since the Grenfell tragedy and continue to do so today. Constituents have contacted me about being trapped in unsafe homes, unable to seek alternative accommodation or pay for safety upgrades to their buildings out of their own pockets. They'll be relieved to hear these legislative changes, but to put things in perspective, why we need these legislative changes urgently, I'll read a message sent to me by one of my constituents concerned about the safety of a nearby tower block in the borough. The tower blocks have been found to be clad in combustible material, and the landlord is currently unwilling to pay for the replacement. It will cost almost £40,000 per flat to replace, with which individual homeowners are unlikely to be able to afford. They've already been hit with higher service charges to pay for patrols. Over 2 years after the Grenfell Tower tragedy, people are still living in fear and unable to get on with their lives due to being unable to sell their properties. This constituent goes on to make a very worthy point, one that in the conscience of most people would not have been made. But the fact that it does explains why we urgently need this legislation. They said, homeowners should not be expected to foot the bill for decisions made by governments who set the building standards. As homeowners cannot afford to fund the replacement of cladding, the necessary building work will not happen and people will continue to live in unsafe properties, risking another tragedy. These building works should be funded by the government as a matter of urgency and the liability for the costs agreed between the government and builders. Madam Deputy Speaker, legislative changes to ensure the building owners take responsibility for the safety of their tenants is necessary because, as we've seen, where a loophole exists, some will exploit it despite the risk posed to residents. I must also take this opportunity to raise concerns over the practicalities of this bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's important that we make these legislative changes, but it's equally important that these changes can be acted on. The Local Government Association has raised concerns about disparities between the fire safeties order concept of responsible person and the proposals for an accountable person and a building safety manager contained in the government's response to building a safer future consultation. Clear guidance must be issued on who is responsible for carrying out essential fire safety checks, or we face the risk of some continuing to avoid their responsibility to their tenants. Local authorities and fire services must also be supported financially and logistically in ensuring that these checks can be carried out. Councils with large stocks of social housing have a duty to ensure that the safety of a large number of tenants, and even before the introduction of this legislation, have raised concerns that there is a chronic shortage of fire engineering expertise in the UK. Madam Deputy Speaker, the government should act now to set up a degree, conversion and apprentice schemes to address this. I hope that the government will take steps to ensure that no tragedy like Grenfell Tower can be allowed to happen again. Madam Deputy Speaker, after nearly 3 years, residents in tower blocks can feel safe in their own homes. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.